through and going live. Awesome, and we're live on YouTube. Thanks everyone again for showing up to another Open RFC deep dive call. These are the alternating call times that we have with the normal Open RFC agenda calls. Today is going to be a little bit different based on the fact we didn't get around to choosing a specific topic to dive into. We do have an agenda that is outlined and I'm sharing here in chat. Feel free to add yourselves as attendees there. The agenda is essentially an outline of existing RFCs, very similar to the list that we looked at and discussed last week. And there's a couple items on here we thought we wanted to touch on a little bit more since some work has been done over, or at least since the last call even. And I know Roy, who just had his laptop crash, is going to join in and wants to speak to a few of those items that have been queued up. Just going through the basic housekeeping though. Again, this call is sort of supposed to be meant for deeper conversations on some of the open RFC proposals that we have in flight. Again, all these calls and any communications that we have online are all under a code of conduct that we ask everybody to abide by, and you can find a reference to that in the npm RFCs repo on GitHub. And again, the desired outcome here is that we push forward on some of these features and try to gain consensus with the community and work closely with the community, make sure that we're building the right things and having the right discussions. So before we jump into sort of the list that we've sort of put together today, is there any announcements that anybody had or any introductions we want to make? Nikita, I think, is this your first time on the call?
Yeah. Hello guys, I'm from Ukraine. Yeah, I'm working on a Sonotype company which uses NPM tool in our purpose. So we provide some possibility to store the NPM artifacts in our application. So awesome. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining. It's good to see more new faces every time we run one of these calls. So awesome. So just digging in here, also, if there is anything that we want to add onto this agenda or move around, please let me know. Does anybody have any additions looking at the doc as it is right now? I'll just keep spinning until all the attendees add themselves. No? If not, then we'll get going. So the first item is PR 135. So clarifying and outlining sort of the RFC withdrawal process and sort of what that would look like. Sort of this is a document that I threw together, some language I threw together to, again, formalize what that would look like, and just to make sure that we are communicating how we might move forward with essentially not implementing something that we've previously ratified. It seemed like there was no qualms about sort of the language before. The one that I know Isaac had was just where the amendment positioning would be. So I switched that up in the actual pull request. So we asked that, as a community, as a team here, if we're going to essentially pull something out of that backlog and say that we no longer think it's relevant or makes sense, then we should probably update and give a reason why. And that amendment should be at the top of the existing RFC before we move it into essentially that new state. So I'm wondering if there's no feedback, do we think we can just ratify this and pull the PRM?
It turns out to be a bad idea. We have the steps for how to pull it out now.
Exactly. It's a good
point. Looks good to me.
key that up to just pull through. Awesome. I see Wes also gave +1. Okay, moving on. Oh, go ahead, Wes.
Sorry. No, I was just saying I'm sorry for double approving. I realized after I did it, the check mark wasn't green, so I thought maybe I hadn't said thumbs up, but anyway.
Oh, good. Cool. Moving on to item number 2. So removing the depth flag from npm outdated. I know that we had quite a bit of discussion around this. Not sure if, Wes, you eventually made a net new issue on sort of the broader scoped discussion that we started to have on this, but maybe
it didn't.
Claudia,
Was that the outcome? Well, I just made the one comment
sort of
here.
Yeah.
It was the config thing, right? So I have the two comments. One is, in addition, the addition of the all flag. This was 21 days ago, so this would have been a couple of meetings. And I don't think that got addressed necessarily, right?
Yeah, I think the where we ended up landing on it was there are actually a few other cases where we might want to use --all. So we do want to have kind of all be the default when you do npm update. So it's not relevant there. But if I believe it was npm ls, we're sort of tossing around some ideas for basically making it only show the top level depths by default in a somewhat more abbreviated way, so you don't get this massive terminal dump when you run an npm ls. And so all will probably be relevant there. I think it's fine to just have it as a config. It's sort of meaningfully different from --long, which already has some relevant meaning to npm outdated. So yeah, I'd say move forward with this. I mean, that was the only objection, was kind of a bike shed over the config name, and it's fine.
So we are saying we're all right with, and I'm not disagreeing, but just to clarify, we're all right with if somebody sets all in their npm-rc, it will now apply to multiple commands, right? That's the outcome.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, with the same semantics in each case, so it's, considerably less hazardous than most other things.
Okay. And so that means, Claudia, if you want to look into ratifying that, feel free to, you can do that async after this call.
Okay.
And I don't think there's any amendments actually to be done in terms of like just wording, but that can be done.
I mean, the only other
cool.
thing that was my other comment was the only other comment was, can we add logical and physical path? But I don't see any updates since that comment. There's a thumbs up, which leads me to believe this. Oh, that was just Jordan. So,
so the problem,
do we think we can add that?
I mean,
before we land it?
The short answer is not really. And the way that we show the logical path now makes it kind of rather cumbersome in the output. We will kind of do a couple of rounds of what we show in terms of the wanted path. In other words, like the implementation for the way it's doing all right now in the v7 branch, I think is most of the way there, but it's got some weird edges that probably need to be sanded down before before a proper 7.0 release. Yeah, so you will effectively show. I don't know. The problem with logical path is the traveling salesman problem, right? And this really like exponential explosion, literally exponential explosion in the number of times a given node in the tree will end up having to be shown, right? Because each thing that has, it's one thing to show everything, all of the things that depend on me and all of the versions that they want. on a particular node. But in order to show every logical path, I also have to show everything that depends on them and everything that depends on them and so on. Because each one of those will be a different logical path, which is what we do now. And it's horrible. It makes NPM outdated, dash dash depth kind of useless. It's sort of the motivation for this feature in the first place.
So that's for the change, right? The depth to all. But for a tooling side, knowing the logical path is very helpful, right? Even if it is a lot of extra, like maybe we don't show it in the standard output, but maybe it's hidden behind some sort of maybe dash dash long, or I don't know, whatever. But like if I did dash dash JSON and dash dash all and dash dash long or something and got every single logical path, that would from a tooling side, I'd be able to then build like something that goes looks and sees like maybe the minimal update that would result in it no longer being locked to an older version, right? But like as it stands, I rely on NPM. I mean, I'd have to recreate the whole tree myself, right, in order to do that from the outdated.
So what we could do to give you that is in the like kind of long all output, we could show you not just which version ranges are required, but the physical path of those nodes with that requirement. So you'd be able to say, okay, well, this node in the tree is depended on by these other nodes in the tree. And, without making it look like there's 150 things that all depend on McDerp, when really it's like 3, right?
That makes sense. I'd have to maybe spend a little bit of time seeing it and thinking through, but that seems like it might solve the problem at first glance. Yeah.
If you do want a way to get a nicely built out and fully functional tree with all of the depths and all the relationships, I have a module I've been working on that could help you with that. So maybe shelling to NPM outdated with JSON output might not be even the best way to do that going forward.
Totally, and if we can get a way that is going to be supported by y'all that does that without it being shelling to NPM, I'm super happy for that to be the solution. That's actually a much better solution in my opinion. But I don't want to be the one building like third-party tooling that would then have to keep up with whatever changes you make, which is where shelling out to NPM sort of has some benefits.
Yeah. I mean, I think as a general kind of strategic design goal, the NPM CLI should really be first and foremost for humans, and the other modules that we use should provide that kind of deeper programmatic access. So if you do want to, I've told you, if you want to do that with Arborist today, it's a little, you're kind of taking on some risk because it's so early. But once that gets to a 1.0 and we have a general release of NPM v7, that's going to be much more stable. So, if you just want to like do things with package trees, that will be kind of the power tool for you to use there.
Yeah, that seems like a good long-term solution for sure. So maybe I can retract my statement and then say like we'll resolve this in the future through other means, so that we don't, because I don't want to sit here and block this change. Like this is just a good change.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
So moving on to the third item, which is PR number 135, the RFC, which was recently added, I think last week, actually add NPM app ID to HTTP header. So I think
it's Nikita's, right?
I don't know who was the last. Yeah, Nikita. If you
that's mine.
maybe quickly give us, if you want to give us quickly a little bit of insight into your thinking behind the RFC, and then I know that Isaac and Jordan and others have chimed in.
Yeah, sure. I want to make a quick brief why we want to add app ID to the NPM tool. Basically, as I said, I'm working on Nexus Repository Manager. It's Sonotypes products. I might be heard about this. It's like a JFrog. And we are using app-ID parameter while performing npm audit command. So for our user, which uses Nexus Repository Manager, have to provide application ID to perform npm audit command. So since for now, npm audit provides in the body package log file and some headers in parameters. So for now, we have to inject this application ID to package log. So we can't inject it anyway. So we use this application ID from package log, and we have to say for a user, you have to open a package log file and write the application ID. And when we can read this information in our application. So to make this process as much as easy, we decide to add this parameter to HTTP header.
And is there a way that you're getting around this today? Like, are you working around this problem today in terms of like, are you proxying or something, or how are you blocked essentially?
We are still working. It's maybe have status in progress, something like that.
Well, it sounds like you're just having the user add the app ID manually, which works, but it's pretty terrible.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So we had actually scoped out and specified something very similar to this quite a while ago, like 2 years ago. Time flies. And the goal was somewhat similar to this, to be able to add the ability to mute certain audit advisories or store secrets and kind of other metadata along with an application, so people can stop putting things in their env files and text files in their repo. And so some of what I'm suggesting is kind of informed by that. And the way I imagine it working is we basically have if the server responds with an HTTP header of the npm app ID, then the CLI will just put that in the package JSON. And whenever npm, the CLI, makes a request to the server, it sends the app ID along. So what that can actually let us do is a lot of interesting stuff beyond just audit or audit advisory overrides. We could, say things like, for this particular application, I want to always apply these overrides, or I never want to install anything that has a vulnerability above a certain level, or whatever kind of policies you could imagine enacting, right? Don't let me even accidentally install something with a GPL license, and so on. So I actually really love to implement this for V7. I think it's got a lot of uses, and I just kind of wanted to. Some of my pushback on it was just like, let's maybe make this a little bit more generalizable, so that it can be used in more sorts of situations.
Yes, I agree.
Cool.
So I'm wondering, so it sounds like what you just described is sort of like a arbitrary package metadata API outside of our current setup, which is just like put it in a package JSON. Do I understand that correctly?
Maybe yes.
Kind of.
Actually, It's no matter where and how application ID will be inserted in package.json file from system environment variables or from parameter npm2 parameter or etc. I just want to make this process as much as possible easier.
Yeah, so it would provide basically a hook for assigning metadata to an application in a similar way that you can assign metadata to a published package. So right now there are things like, you know, if I'm publishing something, that's one thing, and there's a bunch of stuff I can do with that on the registry. But I don't run npm publish on my website, right? I install there and I push it to Git, and it goes to my, you know, CDN and gets published onto the website or whatever. But I still may want to, you know, have some hooks to do some interesting stuff with, like, who has, you know, tracking. Like I want to log like all of the different IPs that this server has been installed on, and make sure that, you know, if I have a server in production that has a security vulnerability, I can track it down and say, okay, it was installed on this date by this, you know, particular process at this IP address. I can go and fix it.
This has some, this has some quite sweeping implications for like what features it would enable, which go quite a bit beyond just the audit example that's in the RFC, right? Like, I'm just trying to make sure I understand the breadth of this.
Yeah, no, it's a general purpose tool data hook that we could hang all kinds of stuff on.
So yeah, and then in my head, like, how would that be defined is more like what I'm interested in terms of, would that be like namespace, like is an app ID automatically generated for us? And I don't think right now we also have an understanding of applications versus like packages.
I would say it would have to be, I would assume that it would have to be an opaque token that's generated by the server. I mean, that would be kind of my preference, right? I don't want to have meaning on the app ID. The meaning semantics are hanging on name and version.
Sure.
But I don't know, like you might want to have some, even if you had some way to name these things on a website or on a server, you'd still want this token to just be something that's suitably unique and more like for machines. But I don't know, like that's an interesting kind of question. Like, could I what happens if I just go into an application of mine, right? Like what happens if I just copy and paste your app ID into my package.json? Like, so since there's no stopping that, the server has to have a way to manage this thing and have be the kind of final authority on it and say, well, no, that app ID is actually owned by Darcy Clark. Here's a new one. Or something. I don't know. This is kind of the stuff this is the edge cases that need to be explored. The core idea is good and simple, and certainly I think would solve Nikita's use case. And it's a lot better to say for Sonatype, for Nexus, to say, here's the app ID that you need to put in your package.json, or here's the app ID you need to put in your config or your environment, rather than, okay, you're going to run npm install, and then you're going to open up your package.lock.json and manually add this field in this giant JSON file that typically gets thrown away, right? Like so it's still a step in the right direction. But yeah, there are some interesting edges that need to kind of be specified. And so, I don't think it's quite like ready to just dive into implementation, but it is a good idea with a lot of like wide-reaching functionality.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts initially here? I know I'm probably gonna sit on this for a day or so and then try to formulate some some feedback. Well, I appreciate Makita. This is a great first RFC. This is awesome. So
Yeah, thanks, Ethan, for attending.
Yeah, I think we'll have to maybe try to pull out, the details of how this might actually be implemented. And I think that, as to what Wes was saying, there's probably a whole bunch of other use cases we would want to surface, which may make us think about this a bit differently.
There's also some interesting privacy implications, which we would have to be, I think that they're resolvable. It's something to be mindful of. I don't want to get into a situation where, like, now the NPM registry is tracking in some, or potentially tracking in some nefarious way, like everything that you're installing, right?
Or being, I think, And I'm wondering if there's any way we can get some sort of unique key or unique identifier out of existing, like our existing infrastructure, like if that's what you're looking for, right? Or it's, you're providing some secret that's being passed through the registry is more like what that sounds like.
Yeah, it seems like more like this would be, at least to start, something that other providers can add additional like features based on, or leverage points for them. Mm-hmm. Whereas like for the public registry, it's a little bit less valuable. And maybe that's making a stretch, but like you wouldn't have, like, you definitely wouldn't want your, My Random Express app reporting back at, a tracking ID to public NPM every time I install, right? But like at Netflix, we absolutely would love this ability to be able to see where these things are coming from and tie that back to an application and a repo. We're actually doing this on our own without any support from registries. We've hacked it into our infrastructure.
Right. So is Nikita.
Right. Exactly.
One way to thread the privacy needle might be to say that like the only way that an app ID gets assigned into an application is via some specific action. So you would run, npm app create foo, and it'll drop a UID in your package.json, and then from that point forward, it'll keep reporting it to the server. But it would not have a situation where the server can just say, hey, I've never seen this app before. Here's an app ID. Hang on to it, I'll track you.
So since this, brings up the what is sent with audit, it actually seems like another possible way to approach the same problem that would at least solve the audit part would be to provide a new key in your package JSON that just sent an arbitrary object always, like anytime you regenerated a package lock, would copy over that entire object, right? So that we're not just like pigeonholing ourselves into an app ID, but if you had extra metadata that you wanted to be regenerated into a package lock every time for, the purpose of it being sent with audit, or possibly other. The being sent with audit's pretty much the easiest one to think of, right? Because that's just the way audit works today.
Well, I would send app ID along with everything.
Right. I guess I'm just saying if you're already going to use audit to leverage inside of your internal tooling, right? Say you're going to now track every build and what was installed at the build time via audit. App ID is just one possible thing you might want. You might also want what was the Git hash at this time, right? You might also want what was the, what is the Jenkins controller that builds this project, and what is the name of the Jenkins job that builds this project? Like if you put that all in a package JSON in a spot that always copied over to the package lock, then you'd get that for free in audit.
I mean, this starts to sound more like a plugin architecture, right? Like, because I don't I don't just have some arbitrary metadata that I'm going to put in my package JSON and never touch again. I want to run a command, and I want to find out what is the Jenkins build ID, what is the Git hash.
Maybe we have a metadata file we add to every single project that puts in the Jenkins master and the Jenkins job names and a bunch of other metadata about how our build infrastructure works. We put that in a separate metadata file that gets sent along with all sorts of stuff and is very helpful and is hard coded and almost never changes.
Well, your Git hash.
I'm not saying that works for everybody.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to take a ton of time because we do have another 5
we
or
got
6
other stuff to
items.
do.
Yeah. But I think that we should probably, Wes, if you have a couple other use cases already in mind that would you could see, especially broadening the scope from app ID to an object, and for us to figure out, where this would fall in terms of how it could be implemented, feel free to add some commentary and color to the existing discussion.
Absolutely, I'll do that.
Awesome. Cool. Moving on. So this is kind of exciting. Roy, the warrior, weekend warrior, who's been working really hard, also being a full-time dad, has worked out over the weekend on something that he found pretty interesting. So RFC number 144, npm diff. Do you want to speak a little bit to this, Roy?
Yeah. Maybe you can even run a quick demo, right? So yeah, no, it's just that I got bored with all the video games I was playing, and then I decided to hack on something for a change. So yeah, and basically it's just a command that I always wish the CLI had natively, right? We have some solutions on the user land, but I always wish it was a native thing to the CLI. So I think I can just quickly jump
feel free to share your screen.
Yeah. So,
can you zoom in a bit? That'd be great.
Can I?
Command plus.
You mean? Yeah, you mean like this? Make it. But also maybe I should
just
make it
text.
smaller.
There you go. Beautiful.
Yeah,
that's
better.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, so basically it's an npm diff command. So maybe a good starting point is being able to compare two packages, right? So you can provide it any spec, and it will convert it to something that it will fetch the tarballs for the two versions, and we'll compare it and basically print in the standard output a Git unified diff compatible output. So you can kind of reuse any tooling you're already using along with that. So here I have this dummy package I can just use for demo's sake. So basically I'm comparing that specific version to whatever is the latest published. So basically npm diff, spec A, spec B, and that's going to kind of output what you expect, right? Git diff compatible kind of output. So that means I can also use that output in any existing tooling, Git, so the specific parser that will kind of print prettier diffing output, right? It's going to be pluggable right away. And so another interesting usage for this is complementing the regular just audit or npm outdated experience, right? So you run npm outdated, you find out, oh, Yards has a change. Oh, there was a patch version release there. So you could also just run npm diff and Yards, and it's going to compare wherever version you have installed with whatever is latest here, right? Yards is basically just doing the same as latest, but you can also possibly just say, okay, I want to know specifically against 3.1, and you have the expected result, right? You see the difference between those versions.
I have a quick question, if
Yeah.
that's okay. So the npm outdated output includes current, wanted, and latest.
Sure.
I see a use case for diffing between current and wanted, meaning what am I about to update to? And because the diff between either anything and latest is almost always, or is very often going to include breaking changes.
Right. That is a very
So
good
like,
point. Yeah.
I wonder if the default might be better to be current to wanted, and then like maybe another mode to do, to do between current and latest.
Right. One way I was approaching this problem, like, because I want to have this kind of interoperability between the commands, right? So I was kind of like thinking about maybe outdated should have a more friendly output, right? So maybe so that I can like hack some things, like, I don't know, like very quickly, but like in this example over here, I could filter for like just JSON yards and like wanted, and then I could possibly pipe that into npm diff, right? I could like stars npm diff and like get that kind of experience right away.
That assumes you have JSON installed.
Right, I do have, yeah. But you get the point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was talking about this with oh yeah, you have to do
Right, the name, yeah.
The name of the package.
Yeah.
Just put yargsat before the $.
Before. Yeah. But yeah, you get the idea. I kind of was thinking about it, and I would like to have a more a better interface to kind of plug these commands together, right? So that I can combine them. Especially, I can see a use case for like piping stuff into like interactive, an interactive interface like iPipe2, right? Like, and then you can just select whatever you want to run the diff against. But I can totally see the use case of making them better to work together.
Another question I have here is like, is there, beyond just the raw diff command, are there any flags on this?
Well, I was thinking about like one that I definitely want is like having the like name only, so that like if you just like I want it to be closer to git diff as possible, right? So like in the same way git diff, you can retrieve the list of file names that were changed. That is one that I haven't got into yet, but I would kind of like, it was one that already came to my mind. Yeah, this would be a nice option to have too, so that you can have more tooling.
And I guess one of the questions I had there is like specifically like, if that actually kind of combines nicely with what my idea was, which is like, I just want to look at index. Like I don't care about the changes in package JSON. I just want to look at a single file because that's the file I know, or like I don't care about tests. So like just being able to kind of pass a single file name would be nice. Right.
Yeah, which is a good point. Like I thought about it in the purpose of change logs, like in the because change logs are very useful, right? So like I built in, like in my little POC here, I built a small like you can compare like latest releases for the npm CLI, and I built into a change log argument that you can send, and it's going to filter for only the change log file. But maybe that can be extended to like accept any arbitrary file instead of just doing it for changelog. But changelog will be nice because it's kind of a very relevant one. And maybe we can also like have a fallback to comparing against GitHub releases also, right? Like if a changelog file is not available, maybe we try to default to GitHub. But that's a more advanced use case. Maybe it's outside of the scope of this command.
The colon exclamation mark in like Git, you can do filtering with git diff now, filtering for files, which might solve for, if we implemented something similar.
Right.
Solve for the use case of I want to ignore all the the test directory, but anything else show me. So if you truly want to make something more similar to that.
What I posted in chat is sort of the Git format, right? So you can do anything after the double dash will be your filter, like your input. It's just so we could just follow the same, like, right? If you do like git diff, head --1 -- index.js, you'll only get the diff in index.js, right?
Right. Oh yeah, that would be definitely nice. Yeah. So one last thing I think there's into it, like it's similar to like just running git diff with no arguments. You get a quick diff between the files changed, right? I would also like to be able to do npm diff. This is more for package orders, right? So you're in a current package, like a project that is a package that you publish to the npm registry. So you run npm diff, and you're able to kind of like get similar output, but this is comparing against the latest published release in the npm registry. So and also only really using files that are tracked by your npm package. So if you edit like anything outside, anything that is not published to your package. So let's say I do a change in the test file, but it's not published. So if I run npm diff, it is not going to show up, right? Unlike a git diff that is tracking all the changes in the repo. So yeah, so this is basically like the surface I covered in my small POC, but Isaac already brought like some interesting use cases. Like it would be nice, like as a spec, I would also like to point to maybe a folder, right? Especially with workspaces. It would be nice to point to my local folder and compare that against something else that in the registry or even in your machine, like maybe compare stuff from two different places in your file system.
So my feedback is like, this is awesome. I drop into git log so frequently to just like, okay, let's figure out what's the tag that I last published and then git diff against that just to kind of see what it is I'm about to publish. Like, should this be minor or major or patch? There's all kinds of good reasons to use this. There's also a lot of server side and security use cases where, you know, we might want to, for example, there's some code that we have now that actually tries to detect malware by detecting by running a diff against the installed or the published package artifact and the git repo, if we can figure out what that git repo is and what the head is that it was published from. Because one common way to try to sneak malware is you don't check it into GitHub, and instead you have this like very innocuous seeming package that when you go look at the source on GitHub, everything looks kosher, and then what's actually published in npm has, you know, a Bitcoin miner sort of tacked onto it or something. So there's two things here. The first is the implementation in terms of like what can sort of be tweaked from Roy's Hack Together weekend project. And I think this is a great start, and we could just make it, you know, tighten it up a little bit. But the other thing is that the UX around it, and that's kind of where it gets more interesting and where we need to see a much more full-featured kind of RFC conversation. One concern is that npm's CLI argument parsing is very different from Git's. So some of the things that we do with double dash and stuff, like if our goal was to match Git's CLI arguments exactly for diff, then it's going to be very much an odd duck in terms of how we pass configs to it and stuff. So that may be worth it to match Git as much as possible, or it may just be, you know, look, we provide this other way of doing certain things and you just have to learn it.
Yeah, not to mention there's
trade-offs either way.
Yeah, there's so much stuff into Git diff, right? If you want to cover the entire surface, it's just going to be an impossible or surmountable task.
Oh my goodness, yeah, diffing is such a fundamental part of Git that like it's very intermingled into like a bazillion different config options and stuff. So we're probably not going to get full coverage of it. But even if all that we did was dump out a, you know, very basic kind of patch file format and then let you tweak it, you know, however you want, or display it however you want. Like there's lots of utilities that work on that kind of file output. So that would be a great first start. And then we just have to hash out what are the positional args, what are the flags, etc.
Yeah, this is awesome. want to make sure that we get some time for the next couple, even if there's just updates on the last few, or no updates is an update on the last few items in the agenda. But I want to thank Roy for doing that demo, and encourage folks to provide some feedback, because that just came up this past week. But this is definitely something that I think is definitely useful. We constantly are figuring out and trying to determine whether or not we're going to update a dep based on what's changed, and if the more that you can stay within the console and within where you're working, the better, instead of having to go off and try to determine from change logs in GitHub or GitLab or wherever the source is what's changed. So I really like this is amazing. I think this would help a lot of people. So cool. So moving on, the next item that I want to make sure that we got to, again, from Roy, who's been killing it with the RFCs, and slipped this in, I think, yesterday, PR 146. It's essentially an RFC around a notification system for CLI updates. Do you want to speak to that a bit as well?
Yeah, this one is just a continuation. We started the conversation as a discussion in the issue a couple of months ago, but basically around removing the current update not fire logic we have there that pops up that box telling you that there's a new version of the CLI. Yeah, and Isaac proposed a very neat kind of like replacement to that logic, in which the server could send you a header, and then the CLI, if that header is there, then it presents the output. But given that the conversation actually originated around the package itself, it can be quite noisy. We had some problems with it in the past. So also reworking the UI around that entire UX around showing you, notify you that there's a new version of the CLI available.
Yeah, I haven't dug into the commands or the options around that. Is there's a way to silence that or to change the output right now?
Yeah.
I think one of the keys there, though, was we were just also trying to eliminate a extraneous dep, which we ran into the problem of having update, which we were lucky enough, I think, that you were actually still on that team, right, Roy? So yeah, moving forward, it'd be great if we, slim down what that whole piece of that code looks like, because it seems like there's no need for it to be like a whole other dep.
Yeah. So it's basically, I think it's just missing maybe some more definition on what the new UX UI is going to look like for presenting that information, given that we want to move away from the update not fire dependency. But yeah, right now I focus on the new mechanism of injecting the header. So you send the CLI is going to send the user agent, specifying whether it's current version of the CLI, and the server is going to reply with a response if it knows that a new version of the CLI is available. So maybe Isaac want to speak up to that, like how he imagined that on the registry.
Yeah, so I mean, the part of the challenge of this, and one of the reasons why it's sort of been lower on my priority list is because of just the state that we're currently in with registry engineering. We have a lot of resources being added to the registry, which is awesome. It's one of the things that happens when your company gets acquired. One of the things that can happen when your company gets acquired. The opposite also sometimes happens, unfortunately. But not in this case. They bought us because they want to make NPM better, which is fantastic. The cloud inside of that silver lining is when you add a big team to an existing team, there's some slowdowns before you get the speed ups. So they're currently kind of in the mode of improving the overall architecture and code base, and there's a whole bunch of folks who are kind of learning the ropes and learning how everything's put together, and they're all getting to know each other and building trust and doing all those things when you have two teams kind of smushed into each other. So I don't suspect that we're going to be able to add any, particularly like fancy new server-side features or headers or whatever in the very immediate term.
It might also be like enough of a low-hanging fruit that it might be a good first story for some of the onboarding engineers.
Yeah, it might be. And should probably spec out exactly what that, how that works, right? Like how do we know which package we should be looking at, and based on the user agent string, and just like what is the name of the header, and at least have that spec sitting there as a kind of a registry RFC. And then in the meantime, we can add support for it in our CLI, and then also maybe evangelize it for it on Yarn and PNPM.
Can I just add that there's sort of the general use case, which I thought this was trying to cover, which is just having the registry display arbitrary messaging back to the end user. Well, I could picture
that already.
Yeah, the info header, right? Is that what you're thinking of? Yeah.
NPM notice.
Notice, that's the one. Yeah. That works in a slightly different way, though, right? Because that would, if you set that header on the server side, that would display for every single package or something, right? Like you'd have to figure out the state management yourself, whereas the like update workflow is just here's a message at the beginning. If you right, like, do you see what I'm saying with the difference? Does that make sense?
Right. So you'd want it to be almost, you'd almost want it to be a different kind of notify header that the CLI knows. Okay, I got 8,000 of these duplicate messages. But they're a special header that I just like save until the end, and I print at the end of the run, right? So even though it's in every response, it's maybe something more, a little more of a paved path. I don't know if I would use it as a general purpose, send a notice to the user. I might just kind of continue to lean on the NPM notice header for that. And have this be something that's like, no, specifically, you are using this version of a CLI, and here's the version you should be using. And then
I guess I was kind of thinking
let the tool decide how to display that.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking like we would like to enforce more of these opinions that like my team might have. Like we just don't want, if people are using NPM 5. We had somebody come into our help just the other day using NPM 3. I want to be able to tell them in their CLI that right when they run that command, you shouldn't be doing this. Like, I want it to be huge, and I want it to be, like, I know we can't do that from the open source side, but, like, as a company, like, we want to do that, right? So we're looking at what is the tooling we have to, that we have to instrument to get that to the user. If in the future, NPM had a more generic form of that, when we're on NPM 10 and we're trying to get people off NPM 7, it'd be a lot nicer if we had, actually, it'd be nicer if we had a way to just say, nope, fail, abort. You are not allowed to install with that, right? And that's where some sort of control from the server side in a more generic sense would be pretty valuable, I would say.
Yeah. It should be customizable enough to let you yell at your users for doing that.
Just to be mindful of time, I know we only have 4 or 5 minutes left, and I apologize, Orta, you just jumped on. I know your RFC is the next one that was on the agenda. I don't know if you're frozen or you've taken a screenshot of you smiling. I'm not sure which. Isaac does that to me all the time in calls, so. Hopefully it's the latter. Would you like to dive in and give us any updates on the RFC 126 specifically for adding types information? And just note on the last discussion, folks, feel free to add Wes, definitely top up with the sentiment that this could be, you can see usage beyond the scope of just the updating CLI. For using those headers, right? So, but yeah, Orta, did you want to give an update with RFC 126, adding type information?
Yeah, I think he's genuinely frozen.
Okay, so it's not a screenshot.
Which is too bad. Yeah, he just jumped in at the right time, right? Was about to go for his RFC.
Wondering if somebody can poke them.
I can, yeah.
For the last two RFCs after this one, for 121 and 117, any updates, I guess, Roy, on the running sub commands for workspaces? There's not been any work on that, really?
Yeah, I guess from what I saw in the RFC in terms of comments, I really like PM author left a comment like saying usage of config name would be actually nice, and he left an example using just like -w, which actually, like, saying it's way better than what I was when I was just thinking about it, because having just -w as an alias for like -- workspace, right? It's a much more usable like interface like for users. So I was kind of reconsidering that, but I know Jordan reached out to me in the Slack channel, asking something about it, the running commands across top level and nested workspaces.
Yeah, I was just, I mean, the sort of structures, use cases that are there now, right? One of them is like, I have just a single package. The other is I have a repo that has a packages folder and all of my publishable things are inside there. But then the other one, which I think usually everyone agrees we shouldn't do, but I actually have a new use case for it that I can defend, would be one where the root is a package, but I have another publishable package nested inside it. And that there's my defense for ESLint plugin import is that that's the way the other person built it, and I want npm's commands to work with it. My new use case I don't have to get into right now, but like I don't want to build that structure if it's not going to work. So that's what I was asking, was like, is that a use case that's going to work, or is my new, should I build my new package a different way? Like in Lerna, you can specify that you're in your packages array that dot is one of your packages, meaning like the root is one of your packages.
Oh, and you're also running things in the.
Yes.
Yes.
And this is not for like ESLint plugin import. The root is published, and so are some of the sub packages. For the like thing, I'm building one thing where I'm using Lerna at the moment, and I'm using dot because I want to be able to run the same commands in the root as well as the sub packages, even though only the sub packages are published. And I want to, I wanted to leverage like Lerna's parallelization and stuff. Right. And then for my new use case, I want the root to be published, and I want a single sub package to be published, because the sub package's only purpose is to serve as a, feature detection mechanism for the root one.
Right. No, yeah, I think
so. I'm just trying to figure out, will all those use cases work with npm's command or not?
Yeah. Let's definitely follow up with that in the RFC comments. I think is a valid use case, and we should at least document it and make sure like covered by tests in Arborist. And, yeah. Cool.
So I apologize, we're at and a little bit over time, but Orta, I know, so you jump back on. Could you, I apologize for putting you on the spot, but maybe you could give us, for folks that have to drop off, feel free, we'll go a couple minutes over here. I apologize, but maybe Orta, if you want to give us an update on the types RFC and maybe some discussions that I know have happened out of that discussion specifically.
Sure. So one of the main feedbacks from the last Open RFC was that sort of using just a binary root of the sort of package in the same way that we do the main field in a package. And so I updated the current RFC to sort of to basically reflect that, and pinged the flow team who don't have a similar sort of equivalent field as main for flow files because they just automatically resolve. Yeah, I can kill my video then. They didn't have the equivalent main field, so it was also requesting that they support a field like that in order for that to work. So other than that, addressed at least all of the questions from the last Open RFC. Might give it back.
Yeah, you were a little bit choppy there, but I think we got the gist of it. You've done a bunch of work to get updated for sure. I haven't had a chance to relook at the RFC since our last conversation. I'm not sure if other people have.
Yeah, it's okay. It's not like a super high priority or anything, but I'll just keep pushing this ball over time.
I appreciate it. And I'll make sure that we pull this up for our next call. So you get a bit more time. I apologize that it's been one of the last ones we look at each time. So feel free for folks that haven't kept up with that, you can jump in and see the updates that was made. Apologize again for running a couple minutes early, but are late. Appreciate everybody jumping on today, and hopefully I'll see you all next week. Same time, same place. And feel free to follow up in the NPM RFC's repo with any of the discussions that you found interesting today. So hopefully everybody's staying safe and healthy, and I'll talk to you next week.
All right.
Ciao.
Yeah, folks.
Thank you very much.